You'll end up broke, poor girl.
My father's voice pierced the laughter and music, sharp and sudden. The clink of silverware froze. My mother's smile tightened. My brother looked away. The words hung above the Christmas table, shimmering in the air like frost. I can still see the golden lights reflecting off the crystal glasses, the smell of baked apple pie mixing with the heavy scent of the room, and the silence that followed his sentence. A silence that resonated with cold judgment. That was the night I stopped being his daughter and started becoming something else entirely. I was 24 then, sitting at the long mahogany table in the dining room of our family mansion in Connecticut. Every inch of that house was a monument to my father's ego. The elaborately patterned stone floors, the oil portraits of Carlisle ancestors, the grand staircase that seemed designed for magazine covers, not real people. Christmas at the Carlisle estate wasn't about love. It was about legacy. "Dad," I said quietly, trying to steady my voice. "I never asked for your money. I just wanted your belief." He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine like a judge before sentencing. "Belief is earned, Emma. You walked away from the family business, from everything we built. You chose fantasy over fortune." My mother Margaret touched his wrist lightly, her diamond bracelet flashing under the chandelier. "Richard, let's not ruin Christmas." He ignored her. "I'm not ruining it. I'm teaching a lesson." Then he turned to me, his smile sharp and cold. "You can't build an empire on dreams, sweetheart. The world eats people like you." I looked at him, at the man who once lifted me onto his shoulders to watch fireworks in the summer sky. Somewhere between those childhood nights and this dinner table, I'd become a stranger in his eyes. "I'm not asking for an empire," I whispered. "Just a chance to build something of my own." He chuckled, low and dismissive. "That's exactly what broke people say before reality hits." Laughter rippled down the table, polite restrained, the kind that hurts more than cruelty. My older brother David offered me a pitying glance but said nothing. He never did. Silence was his safest currency in this family. I remember pushing my chair back, my palms slick against the linen. My chest was tight, my throat raw. "Excuse me?" I said, standing. "I need some air." No one stopped me. I stepped outside into the cold night, the snow crunching beneath my heels. The mansion glowed behind me, warm, perfect, suffocating. I looked up at the winter sky, the stars faint behind the city haze, and I made a promise to myself I would build something they couldn't laugh at, something that didn't need their approval to exist. Inside, I heard the faint sound of a champagne cork popping, my family celebrating themselves. They'd already forgotten I'd left the table. The next morning, the sunlight came through the guest room curtains, pale and unforgiving. My suitcase lay open on the bed, half-packed. Downstairs, I could hear their voices, calm, detached, like nothing had happened. My father discussing markets, my mother reminding the staff about the New Year's gala, David tapping on his phone. I paused on the landing, watching them. For a fleeting moment, I thought about apologizing, about pretending the night before had been a misunderstanding. But then my father's words echoed again in my mind. "You'll end up broke." I carried my bags down the steps. My mother looked up first. "Leaving already?" "Yes," I said. "I have work to do." She sighed softly. "You're always chasing something, Emma. I just hope you don't lose yourself in the process." "I already did," I replied. "A long time ago." My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Good luck out there," he said, the words heavy with irony. "The real world isn't kind to dreamers." I opened the front door and stepped into the snow. My car was waiting in the circular driveway, frost glinting on its windshield. As I started the engine, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, eyes, red lips trembling, but beneath the hurt was something else, a spark. That was the moment I understood the truth. Sometimes you have to be thrown out of the house to learn how to build your own foundation. The chilled air drew a sharp line, definitively separating the daughter they imagined from the woman I was determined to become. I sat there for a moment, letting the silence of the engine running wash over me. I drove not with regret, but with a fierce, quiet clarity. That spark was rapidly becoming an inferno fueled by years of silent rage and stifled ambition. I had traded warmth for wind, comfort for risk, and in that exchange, I found a singular, breathtaking sense of power. My hands were shaking, but my heart was steady. The road ahead was empty, yes, but for the first time it was truly mine to map. Driving away, the estate shrank in the distance until it was nothing but a blur of gold and white behind me. Ahead lay an empty road, the winter morning stretching endlessly forward. I didn't know then what I would become. The headlines, the empire, the moment Bloomberg would say my name to the world, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I would never let that dinner define me. In the years that followed, my father's voice became both my curse and my fuel. Whenever exhaustion whispered, "Give up," I'd hear him sneer, "You'll end up broke, poor girl." Whenever fear crept in, I'd remember the glitter of his smug smile. That sentence, his sentence, became the foundation of my empire. People like my father build their power through control. People like me build ours through defiance. Looking back now, I realize that night wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning, the moment a humiliated daughter turned into a woman who would one day own the skies he thought she'd never reach. That Christmas, my father gave me no gifts, but he gave me something far better: a reason to rise. I grew up in a house where success wasn't celebrated, it was demanded. Every wall of the Carlyle mansion seemed to whisper the same rule: perfection is proof of worth. My father, Richard Carlyle, built his consulting empire from the ground up, and he expected his children to treat his achievements like gospel. The family motto might as well have been Carlyle's "Don't fail." From the time I could read, my bedtime stories weren't fairy tales, they were financial reports. My mother used to sit me in my father's office while he barked into his phone about mergers and leverage ratios. I was 7, the first time he made me repeat the phrase, return on investment. I didn't even know what it meant. But I learned early that it mattered to him, and so I made it matter to me. When other girls were at sleepovers, I was practicing polite small talk for networking dinners. When they got grounded for sneaking out, I got lectured for bringing home an A- in economics. Good isn't good enough, my father would say, folding his newspaper. Excellence or nothing. The pressure didn't just sit on my shoulders, it lived there. Every meal was a business meeting. Every achievement was treated as a transaction. And love was conditional, though no one ever said it out loud. I still remember one night when I was 16. I'd been up for 3 days preparing for a regional business competition my father insisted I enter. I won second place. I came home clutching the silver trophy, trembling with pride, expecting at least a smile. He barely looked at it. "Silver is the color of someone who almost made it," he said. "You'll have to do better next time." That was the night I realized my father didn't raise a daughter. He raised a reflection, one that was supposed to shine back everything he believed about himself. My mother was no better. She played the role of the perfect executive's wife, smiling at charity luncheons and quoting business magazines at the dinner table. Yet sometimes when my father wasn't looking, I'd catch a fleeting weariness in her eyes, the look of someone who had practiced her lines for too long. "Your father built something extraordinary, Emma," she'd remind me, her voice a little too bright. "One day you'll thank him for expecting the same of you." But I never thanked him, because the truth was, I was suffocating. By the time I entered college, my life had been mapped out like a business plan: attend Harvard or Wharton, major in economics, return to Carlyle and Associates, and eventually take over the firm alongside my brother David. There was no space in that plan for curiosity or passion, just legacy. Except I did have a passion. I just kept it hidden. It started with something simple: a field trip when I was 12. Our class visited a small regional airport, and while everyone else complained about the cold wind and the noise, I couldn't look away from the planes. The power, the precision, the way they lifted effortlessly off the ground, it was the first time I'd seen freedom made mechanical. From that day on, I was obsessed. I read everything I could about aviation design, operations, logistics. I hid magazines under my mattress like contraband. At night, I'd imagine myself not as a passenger, but as the person running the operation, orchestrating every takeoff and landing. My father found one of those magazines once. He tossed it onto my desk like evidence at a trial. "Pilots are just chauffeurs with wings," he said. Carlyle's don't serve. We lead. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I wanted to scream that leading wasn't about controlling people. It was about creating something that lasts. But in our house, you didn't talk back. You obeyed. My defiance was a quiet accounting ledger tallying up my freedom one class and one hidden magazine at a time. By high school, my fascination with aviation had turned into something more serious. I spent hours researching university programs that combined business and aviation management. When my father caught me reading about Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, he confiscated my laptop for a week. "You'll attend Harvard," he said. End of discussion. I smiled and nodded, pretending to agree. But that night, under the covers, I wrote myself a different promise. One day I'll build something that flies higher than his empire ever could. My brother David followed every rule without complaint. He was the golden child, the one who never questioned, never faltered. My parents adored him for it. I used to wonder if obedience came easier to him, or if he'd simply learned that peace with our father was better than freedom. We drifted apart as the years went by. At family dinners, he'd talk about business expansions and networking events, while I sat silently counting the seconds until I could leave the table. He once whispered to me, "Just go along with it, Emma. It's easier." "Maybe I'm not interested in easy," I'd said. "Then you're interested in pain," he replied. He wasn't wrong. Choosing yourself over family in the Carlyle house was an act of war. In college, I did what was expected on paper. I enrolled in a prestigious business program, aced my classes, and wore the right clothes at the right networking events. But behind that facade, I was quietly plotting my escape. Every class in finance became a lesson in funding startups. Every lecture in operations turned into a blueprint for aviation logistics. I was building a company in my mind long before it ever existed. One afternoon during my junior year, I stayed behind after a guest lecture by an airline executive. We talked for hours about the inefficiencies in private aviation, outdated booking systems, opaque pricing, a lack of personalization. He said something that stuck with me. "You don't have to build planes to change aviation. You just have to build better systems." That sentence became my secret gospel. The day I graduated, my father handed me an envelope, an offer letter for a position at Carlyle & Associates. "You'll start next Monday," he said. I handed it back. "I've accepted another offer." His expression didn't change, but his knuckles whitened. "With who? Atlantic Regional Airlines," I said softly. He laughed once, sharp and cruel. "You're going to waste your degree at an airport. I'm going to learn how things really move," I said. He stood towering over me. "If you walk out that door, Emma, you're walking away from everything we've built. I think that's the point." The silence that followed was the kind that cuts. My mother, Margaret, instinctively took a small step backward, her hand rising halfway to her throat before she visibly forced it down. David looked down. And I, for the first time in my life, didn't flinch. When I left the mansion that day, my father's words echoed behind me like a curse. "Carlyle's don't fail." He was right. We don't. We just redefine what success means. The first morning I walked into Atlantic Regional Airlines, the air smelled like ozone dust and the metallic tang of jet fuel. I loved it instantly. The terminal was noisy, chaotic, alive, nothing like the sterile marble corridors of Carlyle & Associates. Here people moved with purpose, not pride. They weren't chasing prestige. They were keeping planes in the sky. My title was Operations Assistant, which was a fancy way of saying I did everything no one else wanted to do. I managed flight logs, tracked crew schedules, took angry phone calls from passengers, and sometimes even hauled boxes when the night staff was short-handed. It was the lowest rung on the ladder, and yet it felt like freedom. I earned less in a month than what my father paid his driver in a week, but I didn't care. For the first time, I was working for something that was mine. I rented a tiny apartment overlooking the airport, one-bedroom, creaky floors, water, that ran either scalding or freezing, but I could see the runway lights from my window. At night, I'd watch the planes take off their engines, glowing like constellations, and I'd whisper to myself, "Someday I'll own one of you." Those first months were brutal. The hours were long, the pay miserable, the mistakes constant. I once entered a flight code wrong and delayed an entire departure by 30 minutes. My supervisor, a woman named Gloria with a cigarette voice and zero patience, pulled me aside.
"You've got brains, Carlisle,"
She said, lighting another cigarette in the break room. "But brains don't mean much here unless you've got grit. Are you willing to bleed for this job?" I looked her straight in the eye. "I already have." Gloria smirked. "Good. Then maybe you'll last longer than the last 3 who quit." That became my first real lesson in aviation success. Doesn't come from brilliance. It comes from endurance. 2 years passed like one long day. I learned everything I could: aircraft maintenance schedules, FAA compliance, crew rotations, logistics, and crisis management. I volunteered for every overnight shift, every last-minute cancellation. I worked Thanksgiving, Christmas, and my own birthday. When my father called during the holidays to check in, I could hear the laughter of their luxury dinner parties in the background. So he said, "Once how's life as a glorified ticket clerk?" I smiled into the phone. "Exhausting and wonderful," he sighed. "When you're done playing, the firm will still be here." I never called back. Then one February morning, a snowstorm hit Boston so hard that the entire airport shut down. Flights were canceled left and right. Chaos doesn't even begin to describe it: passengers shouting, screens flashing, red, crews stranded. I was the operations coordinator on duty. That meant every problem was my problem. One of our high-profile clients, Jackson Ward, CEO of Tech Vision Industries, was stuck in the terminal, desperate to reach Chicago for a board meeting that couldn't be postponed. His assistants were panicking. His pilot had already left. "Ma'am," one of the gate agents said, "Mr. Ward insists he must leave within the hour." "Every commercial flight's grounded," I said, scanning the system. "But wait, there's a repositioning flight to Chicago tonight, a maintenance ferry with 2 empty seats. It's technically not for passengers, but with the right paperwork." I ran to the operations desk, called maintenance, and within minutes I had clearance for a special permit. Then I called Ward's assistant back. "Tell him to grab his coat. We're wheels up at 45. Ward himself found me 10 minutes later. Tall, silver-haired, furious. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Emma Carlisle," I said, handing him the paperwork. "The person making sure you don't miss your meeting." He studied me for a moment, then cracked a grin. "You know, everyone else told me it couldn't be done. In aviation, I said impossible just means the wrong person's in charge." He laughed. "Remind me never to underestimate Carlisle." That night, as I watched his plane disappear into the storm, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was proving myself. 3 weeks later, I got a call. Jackson Ward wanted me to head his company's corporate flight department. The offer doubled my salary and came with something more valuable: exposure to the world of private aviation. I took it without hesitation. Working for Tech Vision was like stepping into another universe. Suddenly, I wasn't managing passengers in terminal chaos. I was coordinating private jets for billionaires. I learned what true luxury meant: bespoke catering, security clearances, hangar negotiations, fuel contracts, and service standards that bordered on obsessiveness. Ward became both mentor and mirror. "You've got potential, Carlisle," he told me one afternoon as we reviewed a client portfolio. "But you need to think bigger. Stop managing. Start envisioning. Envisioning what I asked." "The next evolution of private flight," he said simply. "People don't want just planes, they want freedom." That sentence stayed with me for months. Freedom. The very thing I'd chased all my life. Every night after work, I wrote notes, drew charts, mapped out possibilities. There were so many inefficiencies in the industry: outdated booking systems, hidden fees, poor customer experience. The more I studied it, the more I realized there was space for something revolutionary, a company that offered transparency, personalization, and trust. The idea grew in secret like a hidden wing. Sometimes in quieter moments, I thought about my family, about the silence from Connecticut, the unreturned calls. My brother sent an occasional text, "Mom says hi," and that was it. I stopped expecting more. Still, there were nights when I'd lie awake in my sleek corporate apartment staring at the city lights, wondering if I'd made a mistake. The world I'd chosen was ruthless. The industry didn't forgive even a single lapse in safety protocol. And yet every doubt vanished the moment I stepped onto a tarmac, the roar of engines vibrating through my chest. That sound was my anthem. 2 years later, TechVision's flight department was thriving under my direction. Ward promoted me again, and my name started appearing in internal newsletters. For the first time, I felt seen not as someone's daughter, but as someone who mattered. Then one evening, as I prepared for yet another late-night debrief, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "Your father's hosting the annual Christmas dinner next week. He wants you to come." I stared at the text, my pulse quickening. I hadn't been to that house in almost 4 years. The memory of that last dinner still stung, the smirk, the laughter, the words that branded me. "You'll end up broke." I typed a reply, then deleted it. Typed again, deleted again. Finally I wrote, "I'll think about it." Then I put the phone down and looked out the window at the city skyline. Somewhere between the blinking lights and the endless horizon, I whispered, "Not yet, Dad. Not yet. But when I come back, you'll see." And for the first time since leaving home, I didn't just believe it, I knew it. By the time I turned 28, I had everything my father said I'd never earn: respect, money, and control. But I still didn't have freedom. Working for TechVision was prestigious, but it wasn't mine. Every decision still required someone else's approval. Every success still had someone else's name on it. The idea for my own company had been living quietly in the back of my mind for years. It started as a whisper on long flights, a scribble in my planner, a voice that asked, "What if you built something better?" I tried to ignore it at first. I told myself it was reckless, unrealistic. But the whisper became louder each time I saw an outdated system bleed profit, each time a lack of transparency cost the client a competitive edge. One Friday night, I stayed late in the hangar, the smell of jet fuel and rain thick in the air. Ward had already gone home, and the building was silent except for the hum of distant engines. I sat on a maintenance crate staring at a jet gleaming under floodlights. Its metal surface caught my reflection, small, determined, tired, but alive. That night I opened my laptop and wrote the first line of my business plan: to give executives back control of their time through transparent, personalized private aviation. That single sentence changed everything. For the next 6 months, I lived a double life. By day, I managed TechVision's growing fleet, negotiating contracts and overseeing flight operations. By night, I became an architect of rebellion, researching regulations, drafting financial models, and building a network of contacts across the industry. My apartment became less a home and more a flight tower, its walls papered with whiteboards, charting complex logistics, potential routes, and data models I called my air maps. I called my idea Helion Aviation. The name came from the Latin helios, meaning sun and lion, a nod to power and independence. It symbolized the balance I wanted: light and strength. I wanted a company that didn't just move people but moved boundaries. I started pitching the concept to people I trusted: pilots, maintenance directors, former executives. Most of them smiled politely and told me it was impossible. "You're too young," one said. "Too idealistic," another added. A few laughed outright. "Private aviation is an old boys' club, sweetheart. You'll burn out before you break in." But I'd heard those words before from my father, from professors, from colleagues who thought ambition had a gender. And I'd spent too many years proving them wrong to stop now. I reached out to Jackson Ward, the one person who had believed in me from the start. We met in his glass-walled office overlooking the city. The winter light made the skyline look sharp and infinite. "You're leaving," he said before I even sat down. "Yes," I admitted. "I want to build something of my own." He leaned back, studying me. "Private aviation eats startups alive, Emma. You'll need capital, aircraft insurance certification, a legal team, a sales force. You'll need blood." "I've already bled for other people's dreams," I said. "It's time I bleed for mine." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he smiled. You remind me of myself 20 years ago. Arrogant, obsessed, and probably right. He opened a drawer, took out a pen, and signed a check. $500,000, he said. Seed capital. I'll take 10% equity, and I'll expect monthly reports. I stared at the paper, unable to speak. Jackson, I don't thank me, he said. Just prove me right. That night as I drove home through the snow, I could barely breathe. The streets glowed with Christmas lights, the same holiday that had once been my breaking point. I thought of my father's voice echoing across that dinner table. You'll end up broke, poor girl. I smiled at the irony. Because now I was broke, but by choice. And I was building something that would make me unbreakable. Helion Aviation was born in a rented office at Bedford Regional Airport, a converted storage room with flickering lights and second-hand furniture. My team consisted of 5 people who believed in me enough to take pay cuts for equity. We worked 18-hour days fueled by bad coffee and blind faith. The first few months nearly destroyed us. Our first aircraft lease fell through at the last minute. A bank delayed our financing for 6 weeks. A major client canceled their contract days before launch. There were nights I slept on the office couch, wrapped in a company hoodie, wondering if my father was right all along. Then, just as we were running out of time and money, an opportunity appeared. A mid-sized tech CEO's flight was canceled by another charter company, and he needed urgent transportation for an investor meeting. Every other provider said no. We said yes. I personally oversaw the flight, handled catering, checked the cabin myself, even drove the client to the tarmac. The flight went perfectly. The next day, he signed a 6-month contract. A week later, he posted on social media, Helion Aviation delivers what others only promise. That single post changed everything. Within a month, we had 3 new clients. A trade magazine featured us in their Innovators to Watch section. Suddenly, the calls started coming. Small contracts first, then corporate ones. I watched our revenue graph rise, for the first time, the red line finally turning black. But success didn't erase exhaustion. I still worked every day, every night, missing birthdays and sleep. My friends stopped calling. My mother texted occasionally. We heard you're doing something with planes, but I never replied. I wasn't ready. Not until I had something undeniable to show them. 6 months later, Helion Aviation turned its first profit. It was small, barely enough to cover bonuses, but it was ours. That night I took my team to a cheap diner near the hangar. We toasted with paper cups of lukewarm coffee. To survive, I said, raising my paper cup. No one of my pilots, a grizzled man named Frank, corrected me with a smile. To altitude. And not looking down. The room filled with laughter. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not because I'd made it, but because I finally understood what making it meant. It wasn't wealth or recognition, it was autonomy, the freedom to steer my own destiny. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I opened an old photo album. There we were, my father, my mother, my brother, and me. Perfect smiles. Perfect illusions. I traced my finger over the picture, then closed the book. He thought control was power. He was wrong. Power isn't holding people down, it's lifting yourself up. And someday soon, I'd show him just how high I could fly. The first time I saw our company logo on the side of a jet, I cried. Not because it meant success, but because it meant survival. Helion Aviation wasn't just alive, it was flying. After nearly a year of relentless work, sleepless nights, and financial close calls, we finally had our own aircraft, a mid-sized jet leased under our name. Watching it lift off the runway that morning felt like watching a part of myself take flight. We were still small, a team of 8 by then, but we were fierce. I built a culture where titles didn't matter and effort did. Mechanics brainstormed with marketers, and every flight attendant knew how to troubleshoot a software glitch if needed. We were lean, hungry, and united by a shared defiance against the industry giants who dismissed us as amateurs. Our booking model, transparent pricing, real-time scheduling, and a concierge-style experience was shaking up the old boys club of private aviation. Executives who were tired of hidden fees and endless phone calls started coming to us for something different: honesty. We didn't just sell flights, we sold trust. I should have been happy, but the higher I flew, the tighter the grip of expectation felt even from strangers. As our name began circulating in business circles, the rumors started too. She's sleeping with her investor Jackson Ward. She's just a front for someone else's money. Helion's only surviving because she got lucky. I was tired of my accomplishments being framed as favors. The first time I heard one of those comments was at a networking event. A man twice my age leaned across the bar and said, "You know, sweetheart, in this business, people like you don't last unless there's someone powerful behind you." I looked him dead in the eye. "There is someone powerful behind me," I said. "Me." He laughed, but the sound didn't reach his eyes. Men like him didn't believe women could lead without leverage. That disbelief became my silent advantage. I worked harder, spoke less, and let results speak for me. Within 18 months, Helion grew from 1 aircraft to 3, then 5. We opened satellite offices in Chicago and Miami. Each new location meant new clients, new risks, and new sleepless nights. But every contract signed felt like reclaiming a piece of dignity my father had once stripped away. One day as I was preparing for a client presentation, my assistant knocked on my office door. "There's a call for you, she said, her tone uncertain. "From Carlyle and Associates." For a second I thought I'd misheard. "Who Carlyle and Associates?" she repeated. "They're requesting a proposal for an international aviation partnership." I felt the air leave my lungs. My parents' company, my father's empire was reaching out to mine. I told her to forward the request. My hands trembled as I opened the email. The message was formal and personal and addressed to Helion Aviation Procurement Department. No names, no recognition, just business. The irony was almost poetic. For 2 days I debated whether to bid on the contract. The professional answer was obvious yes, but emotionally it felt like reopening a wound that had never fully healed. I could already imagine his reaction if he discovered the CEO of Helion Aviation was his broke daughter. I called my mentor, Jackson Ward. "If I win this contract," I said, "I'll have to face him." He chuckled. "And if you don't, then I'll never know what it feels like to win on my own terms." "Then you already have your answer," he said. I submitted the proposal that night. Our pricing was competitive. Our technology, cutting edge, our service model unmatched. I didn't use insider knowledge. I didn't need to. I wanted to win because we were the best, not because I was his daughter. 3 weeks later, an email arrived. Helion Aviation has been selected as the preferred provider for Carlyle and Associates' new global client, Global Innovations. My hands shook as I read it. The contract was massive, our biggest yet. It would triple our annual revenue. But more than that, it meant I'd be face to face with the people who had dismissed me as a failure. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Our team upgraded the interiors of our jets, refined service protocols, and customized every detail for Global Innovations executives. I handpicked the crew myself. Every champagne flute, every thread count of the linens perfect. The night before the flight, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing his face, the smirk, the sneer. I wondered what he'd say when he saw me now. By morning, the hangar was buzzing with activity. Our Gulfstream G700 gleamed under the floodlights, polished to perfection. I checked every inch from the scent of the cabin to the placement of the welcome gift bags. I was about to oversee the most important client flight of my career, and it wasn't just business. It was personal history rewritten. Then came the moment. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the terminal. The doors opened, and I saw them, Richard and Margaret Carlyle, stepping out beside their client, the CEO of Global Innovations. My father looked older, but his confidence hadn't aged a day. My mother's pearls glinted against her cream suit, her posture flawless as ever. They hadn't seen me yet. From behind the glass doors, I could hear fragments of conversation. "Our daughter," my mother was saying with a polite laugh. "She chose to work in aviation of all things. Such a pity she could have been running the firm by now." Their client, Mr. Hayes, smiled. "Sometimes the unconventional path works out better than expected." "Oh, I doubt it," my father replied smoothly. "Aviation's a tough business. She'll come around when reality sets in." Reality had already set in, I thought, and it was standing right in front of them. I took a breath, straightened my jacket, and walked forward. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," I said to the client with professional warmth. "Welcome to Helion Aviation. I'm Emma Carlisle, CEO and founder." The silence that followed could have swallowed the entire hangar. My father's expression froze confusion, flickering into disbelief. My mother's hand trembled just enough for the champagne glass she was holding to slip shattering against the marble floor. The client blinked, realization dawning. "Carlisle," he said, glancing between us. "Wait, this is your daughter?" "Yes," I said evenly, holding my father's gaze. "The same one who was supposed to end up broke." My father's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The client smiled slowly. "Well, I'd say she's done rather well for herself." And as the echoes of the broken glass faded through the terminal, I realized that sometimes revenge doesn't come with fire or fury, it comes with silence and power. And I had both. My father's face went pale, the confident smirk wiped clean like chalk in the rain. My mother's hand hovered in midair, trembling slightly, as if she could piece the shattered glass back together with sheer denial. For years they had dismissed me as irrelevant, a ghost daughter who had wandered off the family script. And now, standing before them in my own terminal with my company's logo gleaming behind me, they had no words left to hide behind. "Shall we head to the jet?" I asked, my tone polite but crisp. The client, Mr. Hayes, CEO of Global Innovations, was still smiling. "I must say, Emma," he said, "I'm impressed. Your company's reputation precedes you. I didn't realize you were the Carlisle they mentioned." I returned the smile. "Most people don't. It keeps things interesting." My father cleared his throat, finding his voice again. "Well," he stammered, "this is quite the surprise." "I imagine it is," I replied evenly. As we walked across the polished floor toward the jet, the air between us was thick enough to taste. My mother avoided my gaze, focusing instead on her reflection in the glass doors. My father, ever the strategist, was already recalculating. I could almost see the thoughts flickering behind his eyes, how to frame this, how to spin this, how to claim this. The jet waited on the tarmac, sleek and silver, with the Helion insignia shining on its tail. My crew stood in perfect formation, greeting our passengers with professional smiles. I watched as my parents' eyes flicked across the aircraft, the staff, the pristine setup inside. Every inch of that jet screamed success, my success. Inside, I gave the client a brief tour, the handcrafted leather seats, the private conference cabin, the built-in espresso machine tuned precisely to his taste. "We've prepared the exact brand of single malt whiskey you prefer, Mr. Hayes," I added. He raised an eyebrow. "You did your homework." "At Helion, I said we always do." As I spoke, I could feel my father watching me, silently assessing. He'd once told me, real leadership isn't charm, it's control. At that moment, I realized how wrong he'd been. Leadership wasn't about control. It was about creation. And I had created something far beyond his comprehension. When everyone was seated, I took my place across from Hayes. My parents sat across from me side by side, like defendants in a quiet trial. The engines hummed softly as the jet taxied toward the runway. Hayes turned to me, his interest genuine. "How long has Helion been operating, Ms. Carlisle?" "6 years, I said. "We started with 1 aircraft, a tiny office, and a team of 5. "Remarkable," he said. "You've built quite the empire." I caught the word empire. It hit me like a note from a forgotten song. "You can't build an empire on dreams, sweetheart." My father's voice echoed from the past. But here it was proof that I could, that I did. My mother's smile was tight, her eyes darting between Hayes and me. "Of course," she said, "we always encouraged Emma's entrepreneurial spirit." The audacity nearly made me laugh. Encouraged, they'd buried it under shame and expectation. Hayes nodded politely. "It's rare to see such a successful family lineage. Seems determination runs in your blood." Maybe, I said softly, meeting my mother's eyes. Or maybe it runs despite it. The silence that followed felt less like a pause and more like a compression wave tightening the air inside the pressurized cabin. As the jet climbed through the clouds, Hayes and I continued discussing business expansion strategies, cost structures, sustainability, and private aviation. My parents sat there, witnesses to every number, every projection, every sentence that proved how far I'd come without them. I could see my father's jaw tighten as he realized how fluent I'd become in the language he once claimed only he could teach me. At one point, Hayes leaned forward. "We're considering extending this contract globally," he said. "Would Helion be equipped to handle transatlantic and Asian operations?" "We already are," I replied. "Our European division launches next quarter." My father blinked. "European division," I turned to him. "Yes, Dad. I've been busy." His lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. For the first time, I saw something I'd never seen in his eyes before, not anger, not disappointment, but confusion. The kind of confusion that comes when the world shifts beneath your feet and you realize you're no longer the center of it. After an hour, Hayes excused himself to take a call, leaving us momentarily alone. The cabin felt smaller without his presence, the air heavier. My mother was the first to speak. "Emma, you should have told us." "I tried," I said. "Several times. You weren't listening. That's not fair." "No," I cut in quietly. "It's honest." My father shifted in his seat, his tone flat. "You've made your point. You've done well for now. Don't mistake luck for permanence," he said. "This isn't about proving a point," I said. "It's about showing you that your version of success wasn't the only one." He looked at me for a long moment, then turned away. "You always had a flair for dramatics." I smiled faintly. "If building a billion-dollar company is dramatic, then maybe I inherited that from you." The seatbelt light blinked on as the jet began its descent into Zurich. My hands rested calmly on my lap, but inside something was shifting. The need for revenge was fading, replaced by something purer, recognition. I didn't need them to apologize. I just needed them to see me clearly, maybe for the first time. When we landed, Hayes shook my hand firmly. "That was the most efficient flight I've ever taken," he said. "Helion will be our exclusive aviation partner moving forward." My father managed a thin smile. "Congratulations, Emma." I looked at him steady and sure. "You too," I said. "Your client just signed a multi-million-dollar deal on my jet." He hesitated, then gave a short nod. As they descended the stairs, the morning sun caught the side of the plane, reflecting the name Helion Aviation in gold. My parents paused briefly, both staring up at it. And for the first time, I didn't feel small in their shadow. I felt infinite. Back inside the terminal, I stood by the glass window and watched the jet taxi away. My reflection merged with its metallic gleam, a symbol of everything I'd fought for. They had built their empire on control. I had built mine on faith. And the difference between us was measured not in money, but in altitude. The headlines hit the next morning like a thunderclap. Bloomberg Helion Aviation secures billion-dollar expansion deal. My phone didn't stop buzzing for hours. Investors, journalists, industry peers, all scrambling to congratulate, analyze, and predict. For the first time, the name Emma Carlisle wasn't attached to someone else's legacy. It was its own. I stood by the window of my penthouse overlooking the city, the winter skyline drenched in silver light. The article on the screen was short, clinical, factual, but I couldn't stop reading it. Each sentence was a quiet vindication. Her empire just hit $1 billion in valuation. The words blurred for a second. I blinked hard, swallowing the lump in my throat. 1 billion. I remembered the night I left that Christmas table, my father's voice slicing through the noise. "You'll end up broke, poor girl." And now here I was, richer than the empire that once exiled me. My phone buzzed again. This time it was David. "Emma," he said when I answered. "Dad's been pacing all morning. Mom's pretending she's not reading the news, but she's been on Bloomberg's site for hours." I smiled. "Let them read. They should know what failure looks like." He hesitated. "You know they're shaken. Proud maybe, but mostly confused. You really blindsided them. That wasn't my intention, I said. I just did what I said I would do. Yeah, he said softly. You really did. When the call ended, I exhaled slowly. The silence in my apartment felt different now, heavier, fuller. Success didn't sound like a champagne toast. It sounded like the subtle, powerful hum of a turbine engine in the quiet of the night. Later that day, I arrived at Helion's headquarters for a meeting with the board. The energy was electric. My employees were smiling wider, standing taller. They'd seen the same article and they knew what it meant. Congratulations, Ms. Carlisle, my CFO, Jenna said, handing me a folder. Our inbox is flooded with new partnership requests. Luxury brands, tech firms, even a few foreign investors. Good, I said, flipping through the papers. We'll expand, but we'll do it our way. No shortcuts, no sellouts. She grinned. Just like you taught us. As the meeting went on, my mind drifted for a moment to my parents, to that house in Connecticut, to the family dinners where I was invisible. Now the world saw me, and for the first time I wasn't hungry for their acknowledgement. I was hungry for impact. That night, I attended an industry gala in New York. It was the kind of event my parents used to live for: crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, rooms filled with people pretending they weren't competing. I'd been invited as the keynote speaker, and though I'd given countless presentations before, this one felt different. When I walked onto the stage, the applause was polite at first, then building. I caught sight of Jackson Ward sitting near the front, smiling proudly. The man who had once written me my first check now watched me standing under the spotlight I had built myself. 6 years ago, I began Helion Aviation, started in a rented storage room with a flickering light and one borrowed desk. We had no backing, no name, and no guarantees. But we had something better, a reason. I paused, scanning the audience. Someone once told me I'd end up broke. That chasing my own path was foolish, that dreams don't pay bills. Maybe they were right about one thing: dreams alone don't pay bills. But belief does. Discipline does. The courage to fail does. The room was silent. You could feel the air tighten, that subtle pull when people stop merely listening and start remembering. Helion isn't just a company, I continued. It's proof that you can build something magnificent out of what was meant to break you. When I stepped off the stage, the applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed. Reporters swarmed. But amid the noise, my thoughts were somewhere else. Back to that Christmas night, the smell of turkey and bitterness in the air. My father's cold laughter. The next morning, my assistant came into my office holding an envelope. This was delivered by courier, she said. The handwriting stopped me cold. It was my father's. Inside was a short note written on his company letterhead. Emma, congratulations on Helion's success. You've done well. If you're open to it, your mother and I would like to have dinner next week. Christmas Eve. The usual place. Dad. I stared at the paper for a long time. The usual place was the mansion. The same table, the same ritual, the same ghosts. For a moment I considered ignoring it, but something in me, curiosity, closure, or maybe defiance, wouldn't let me. When Christmas Eve came, I drove through the snow to the Carlisle estate for the first time in years. The house looked smaller now, almost fragile. My mother opened the door, her smile rehearsed but unsure. You look different, she said, studying me. I am, I replied. My father was already at the table, the same glass of red wine in hand. Emma, he said, nodding, I'm glad you came. The air was thick with unspoken history. We made small talk, at first company news, the economy, polite laughter. But beneath it, tension simmered. Finally, he set down his glass. You've built something incredible, he said slowly. I underestimated you. I tilted my head. You didn't underestimate me, Dad. You erased me. There's a difference. He looked down, ashamed, for the first time I could remember. My mother's eyes glistened, but she stayed quiet. I suppose I thought I was protecting you, he said, and in doing so, you became the reason I had to succeed. He nodded, exhaling. A harsh lesson is still a lesson, Emma. I've always believed that. The irony made me smile. Then thank you, I said. You helped more than you'll ever know." We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But something shifted in that silence, a fragile truce, a shared recognition of the cost we'd all paid. As I drove away, snowflakes glimmered against the windshield like tiny stars. My phone buzzed again, a notification from Bloomberg. Helion Aviation officially surpasses $1 billion in valuation. I laughed quietly. A year ago, I wanted revenge. Now I just wanted to see what altitude was next. And in the quiet hum of the car beneath the falling snow, I realized the climb had only just begun. For weeks after that Christmas dinner, my phone didn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted exclusives. Investors wanted meetings. Everyone wanted a piece of Helion. Fame had finally caught up to the success I'd worked years to build in the quiet hum of a hangar. I'd traded the obscurity of the tarmac for the blinding light of the media. The higher you climb, the more people wait for you to fall. One morning as I was leaving my apartment, my doorman handed me a folded newspaper. My face was on the cover, smiling beneath a headline that made my stomach twist. Daddy's Girl, or Self-Made Star Inside the Carlyle Family Feud. The article wasn't about my company, it was about me. It dragged every detail of my childhood, my fallout with my father, even that humiliating Christmas dinner years ago. My mother's carefully composed quotes were sprinkled throughout. We always supported Emma's ambitions. We're proud of her accomplishments. The subtext was clear. They wanted to rewrite the narrative now that I was profitable. I threw the paper into the trash. Later that morning, I met with our PR team. "Do we respond?" Jenna asked. "No," I said firmly. "We keep quiet. Let our work speak." She nodded, but her expression told me what she was thinking. Silence is noble until it becomes weakness. Still, I couldn't give the tabloids the satisfaction. My father's world had always thrived on perception. Mine would thrive on proof. That night, as I looked out over the city lights from my office, Jackson Ward called. "Congratulations on the feature," he said dryly. "If you're referring to the smear piece, thank you, but no," he chuckled. "You've arrived, Emma. Scandals are just the industry's way of validating power." "I didn't build Helion for validation," I said. "I know," he replied. "But the world doesn't know that yet. Don't let them make you a story. You tell it first." His words stuck with me. 2 days later, I accepted an invitation to speak at the Women in Global Aviation Summit, a prestigious event where I'd once been rejected for being too new. Now they wanted me as their keynote. The irony wasn't lost on me. Standing backstage before my speech, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. She wasn't just surviving. She was a system running at maximum efficiency, turning negative pressure into lift. When the announcer called my name, I walked onto the stage under a wash of white light. Hundreds of faces stared up, executives, engineers, journalists. I took a breath and began. 6 years ago, I was told I'd end up broke. That's not an uncommon prophecy for women who step outside the script written for them. I wasn't supposed to build an empire. I was supposed to inherit one. Laughter rippled through the crowd, but it was knowing laughter, the kind that comes from shared scars. I learned early that success isn't about proving them wrong. It's about proving yourself right. Helion was built on that principle. Not revenge, not rebellion, resilience. The applause was steady, genuine. And for the first time, I realized that my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every person who'd ever been told no and refused to stop anyway. After the conference, I was approached by a young woman in her early 20s. Her hands were shaking as she said, "I wanted to study aeronautical engineering, but my family doesn't believe it's a place for women." "Your story." Her voice cracked. It gave me the courage to apply. I smiled, swallowing the emotion rising in my throat. "Apply," I said. "And when they say no, build your own runway." That night I couldn't sleep. The conversation kept replaying in my head. I thought of all the girls like her, all the dreamers who needed one chance, just one to change their trajectory. By dawn, I'd made my decision. Helion would create a scholarship program for women in aviation pilots, engineers, operations managers, every discipline. It would be called the Carlyle Initiative. When I announced it the next month, the response was overwhelming. Applications flooded in from around the world. Donations followed from companies that wanted to be part of the movement. Even my father's firm, Carlyle and Associates, sent a check. The irony didn't sting this time. I accepted it. Not for him, but for the women who'd benefit from it. During one of the scholarship ceremonies, I stood on stage beside 10 recipients, young women in crisp suits, eyes bright with possibility. One of them asked, "What's the hardest part of getting here?" I smiled. "Believing you deserve to be here before anyone else does." When the event ended, I lingered in the empty hall looking at the banners with Helion's logo. My mother approached quietly. I hadn't seen her since Christmas. "You're doing something good, Emma," she said softly. "I'm trying to," I replied. She hesitated. "Your father, he wanted to come today. Why didn't he?" Her lips pressed together. "He's proud, but pride doesn't let him show it." "You know him. I used to," I said. "I'm not sure I do anymore." She sighed. "He talks about you constantly now. He says you've built something even he can't comprehend." For a moment, the years of resentment softened. Maybe comprehension was never the goal, I said. Maybe I just needed to be seen. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face like she used to when I was a child. "You are darling. The whole world sees you now." After she left, I stood there alone, the room quiet except for the hum of distant city traffic. Her words lingered. "The whole world sees you now." It was true. I was seen, admired, quoted. But visibility comes with a price. As I rode back to my office, my driver handed me a tablet. "You'll want to see this," he said. A new article had just been published. The headline read, "Inside Helion Aviation's Rapid Expansion, Is It Too Much, Too Fast?" The critics had arrived. I leaned back in my seat, watching the skyline blur by. Success has made me visible, but visibility meant exposure. And though I had built wings strong enough to fly above doubt, I was about to learn that in the world of finance, a swift climb only guarantees. The air gets thin and the turbulence cuts deeper. The first sign of trouble came disguised as praise. "We love growth, Emma, but growth this fast often compromises integrity. Are your margins holding the weight?" one investor said during a quarterly review. "We built Helion with stress-tested margins, not guesswork," I replied, my voice steady. "The structure is sound." But behind my confidence, I felt the pressure tightening like air thinning at high altitude. Growth brings admiration, yes, but it also brings scrutiny. And soon that scrutiny turned sharp. The Wall Street Journal ran a piece titled, "The Risk of Rapid Ascent, Helion's Billion-Dollar Gamble." They dissected every move I'd made, questioning our expansion speed, our staffing model, even my leadership style. Overnight, my inbox filled with panicked emails. Clients wanted reassurance, employees wanted stability, and investors wanted answers. For the first time since launching Helion, I felt something unfamiliar: fear. Emma Jenna said, closing the boardroom door after everyone left. "We can weather this, but we need to make some cuts. The market's watching how we react." "Cutting means shrinking," I replied, "and shrinking means weakness." "Sometimes survival isn't weakness," she countered gently. "It's a strategy." Her words stayed with me long after she left. I'd spent years fighting against being underestimated. Scaling back felt too much like surrender. But as CEO, I couldn't afford pride. That night I sat alone in my office. The city below shimmered under cold January light, the streets glistening from melted snow. On my desk lay 2 folders, one for layoffs, one for new hires overseas. Both represented futures I didn't want to choose between. Then my phone rang. The name on the screen froze me, Dad. For a moment I almost didn't answer. Then curiosity won. "Emma," he said, his tone unusually calm. "I saw the article. You're handling it well." "Am I?" A small laugh. "Better than I did when I first made headlines." It's strange, isn't it? Success turns from celebration to suspicion the moment you stop fitting their comfort zone. I didn't respond. He continued, "I made the same mistake once. grew too fast, lost people who mattered. Don't repeat that. His advice, though unsolicited, pierced deeper than I wanted to admit. You think I should slow down? I think you should protect what you've already built before you try to build more, he said quietly. Empires aren't made by speed. They're made by survival. For the first time in years, I didn't feel condescended to. Just understood. The next morning, I made the hardest decision of my career. We would restructure temporarily, freeze hiring, slow expansion, and strengthen operations instead of stretching them thin.
It wasn't glamorous, but it was smart.
The backlash was immediate. Helion retreats. One headline sneered. From Sky Queen to cautious captain. Social media erupted with speculation. Was I losing my touch? Has the billion-dollar valuation been premature? Through it all, I kept my composure. Outwardly, I smiled in interviews, emphasizing sustainability and long-term vision. Inwardly, I wrestled with self-doubt so sharp it hurt to breathe. Then one evening, as I reviewed financial reports, Jenna rushed in. "Emma, you need to see this." She handed me a tablet. On the screen was a leaked internal memo, our restructuring plan published in full by a gossip business site. Someone on the inside had betrayed us. I scrolled, pulse hammering. The article speculated layoffs, financial instability, and even hinted that Helion might be preparing for a buyout. Within hours, our stock dropped 12%. I stood trying to steady my breathing. "Find out who leaked this," I said, my voice low. By midnight, we did. It was someone I'd trusted, a mid-level executive I had personally promoted 2 years earlier. When security escorted him out the next day, he couldn't even meet my eyes. I wanted to feel anger. Instead, I felt exhausted. Betrayal no longer surprised me. It just confirmed that the distance between control and manipulation was always shorter than I hoped, a lesson learned long ago in a Connecticut mansion. That night I went home and opened the bottle of whiskey Richardson had gifted me after our Zurich deal. I poured a glass and stared at the city lights. I hadn't cried because of the stock drop or the betrayal. I cried because for the first time the weight of the billion-dollar valuation felt heavier than the simple exhilaration of being free. A soft chime interrupted the silence, an email from Jackson Ward. "Heard about the leak. Don't let it harden you. The higher you fly, the colder it gets. But remember, this altitude isn't the goal. Endurance is." I reread his words twice, then closed the laptop. The next morning, I arrived at the office before sunrise. I walked through the hangar where one of our newest jets gleamed under fluorescent light. Its name embossed near the cockpit read ECS-01. My initials. My legacy. As I ran my hand along the cool metal, I whispered, "We're not done." Over the following weeks, I worked like a woman possessed. I met with every department head, streamlined operations, implemented cost-saving tech, and personally reassured our top clients. Slowly, confidence returned. Slowly, stability replaced panic. When Bloomberg released its next article 3 months later, the tone had changed. Helion's calm in the storm, how Carlyle's leadership redefined resilience. Reading it, I smiled, not from pride, but from peace. I'd learned what few billionaires ever do. It's not the empire that defines the ruler, it's how she survives when it trembles. That night, as the city glittered outside my window, I raised a glass to the reflection staring back at me. To the woman who had been called naive, rebellious, dramatic, too ambitious, and too emotional, yet still built something the world couldn't ignore. The turbulence had passed, but the sky ahead was far from still. The invitation arrived on a Thursday afternoon, printed on thick ivory paper and embossed with gold lettering. Carlyle and Associates, Annual Holiday Gala. My parents' signature event. For years, it had been the stage where they paraded their success, their prestige, their perfectly curated life. This year's theme, legacy and leadership. I almost laughed when I read it. Jenna found me staring at the invitation later that day. "You're not thinking of going, are you?" "I haven't decided," I said, placing it face down on my desk. She crossed her arms. "You don't owe them anything, Emma." "I know," I said softly. "But maybe this isn't about owing. Maybe it's about to end." For weeks, the idea haunted me. Going back would mean facing the ghosts, the disappointment, the ridicule, the girl I used to be. But something inside me, quiet and determined, said it was time. When the night came, I chose a simple black gown that felt less like a costume and more like armor. I arrived alone, stepping out of the car onto the red carpet outside the Boston Plaza Hotel, where a dozen reporters snapped photos. Ms. Carlyle is Helion. Merging with Atlas Aviation, are you here to support your father's firm? Any truth to the rumors about you running for the aviation board seat? I smiled without answering. Let them speculate. Inside the ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and soft jazz. The crowd parted slightly as I entered, recognition rippling like static through the air. There was my mother, radiant in silver silk, her practiced smile freezing for half a second when she saw me. My father stood beside her, confident as ever, shaking hands with Boston's elite. When his gaze found mine, he faltered. Only for a moment, but I saw it. "Emma," he said when I approached. "You made it." I said I would. My mother leaned in, kissing the air near my cheek. "You look lovely, dear." "Thank you. So do you." The small talk was excruciating. Then the crowd thickened around us. People wanted introductions. "You must be so proud of your daughter," one woman gushed. "The youngest self-made CEO to cross $1 billion. My mother laughed lightly. "Yes, she's always been independent." But my father said nothing. He simply watched me, studying the woman who no longer needed his validation. Halfway through the evening, the lights dimmed and the MC took the stage. Tonight, he announced, "We celebrate legacy." And no family has defined business leadership in Boston quite like the Carlyles. Applause filled the room. My father was invited up first, giving his usual speech about discipline, resilience, and vision. I'd heard it 100 times growing up, sitting at the back, unnoticed. But tonight I was listening differently. It wasn't authority I heard, it was ego. And finally the MC continued, "We'd like to honor the next generation of leadership, Ms. Emma Carlyle, founder and CEO of Helion Aviation." The spotlight found me before I could even react. My father's eyes widened. He hadn't known. As I walked to the stage, a hush fell. Cameras flashed. My heels clicked against marble in rhythmic defiance. When I reached the microphone, I smiled, not the polite smile of a daughter, but the confident grin of a woman who had rewritten her story. "Thank you," I began. "It's surreal to be standing here tonight. A decade ago, I sat in this same ballroom listening to speeches about legacy and success, wondering if there was any place for someone like me in that definition." Soft murmurs rippled through the crowd. I was told success had rules, that it had a pedigree, a formula, a family name attached to it. I believed that once, until I realized rules are just the walls we build to contain other people's fear. Someone near the front gasped quietly. "I built Helion." Not because I wanted to prove anyone wrong, I continued, my eyes flicking briefly to my father, but because I wanted to prove that leadership doesn't have to look like what we were taught. It doesn't have to wear a suit, or come from approval, or follow a path someone else designed. The room was silent. My mother's face had softened, but my father's expression was unreadable. "Legacy," I said finally, "isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn." Applause erupted, growing louder, filling the cavernous hall until it became thunder. I stepped off the stage, heart pounding not from nerves, but from the quiet satisfaction of closure. As the crowd began to disperse, I felt a hand on my arm. My father stood there, face pale but composed. "You've become quite the speaker," he said. "I had good teachers," I replied. He hesitated. "I wasn't always fair to you." "No," I said softly. "You weren't." He exhaled slowly, the weight of years pressing on his shoulders. "I regret the way I handled things," he said, his voice quiet, lacking its usual commanding tone. It was suboptimal leadership, but I will always believe the fight was necessary. "I don't expect forgiveness," I said. "Just maybe understanding." He looked relieved, almost grateful. Before I left, my mother approached, taking my hands in hers. "I was wrong too," she whispered. I used to think success meant control. But watching what you've built, it made me realize control isn't power. It's fear. Fear is what keeps people safe, I said. She smiled faintly. And sometimes it's what keeps them small. As I walked out of the ballroom, the sound of applause from another speech echoed behind me. But this time it wasn't mine to hear. It didn't matter. Outside, snow had begun to fall thick and soft, blanketing the steps of the hotel. I tilted my head up, letting the flakes melt on my skin. For the first time in years, I felt light. When I reached my car, Jenna called. So she asked, "Was it worth it?" I looked back at the hotel one last time, its golden lights glowing against the dark sky. "Yes," I said. "It was the last ghost." As the driver pulled away, I opened my phone and glanced at an email notification from Bloomberg Helion Aviation named Global Innovator of the Year. I smiled to myself. The world was watching. But this time, I didn't need to prove anything. Legacy had found me, but on my terms. And as Boston faded behind me in the snow, I realized the empire was built not on fortune or fame, but on the singular decision to choose flight over fear. The climb continues. The battle to define my own worth was over. The commitment to maintain it had just begun. The day after my father's funeral, I returned to the office earlier than usual. The city was still half asleep, its streets slick with rain and silence. I walked through the quiet halls of Helion, past the portraits of our fleet and the team photos from our early days. Every image told a story of struggle growth and the cold, calculated precision required to beat the odds. The finality of my father's passing had not brought rest, but rather a profound change in perspective. The family battle for validation was done. Now only the business remained. I carried his last silent directive, the need to protect his company's fragile standing, like a new flight plan. I stopped in front of one picture, the first team we ever had. 5 people in a cramped office smiling at a future none of us could have predicted. My younger self stared back at me, hopeful and hungry. I almost didn't recognize her. For years I thought that girl was gone. But standing there, I realized she'd never left. She'd just evolved. Jenna found me a few minutes later carrying 2 coffees. "Didn't expect you in so soon," she said softly. "I didn't either," I admitted. "But this place feels grounding." She handed me the cup. "We've had messages all morning. Clients sending condolences, board members offering time off. You should take some." I shook my head. "No. Work helps. It's the only rhythm I know." She smiled faintly. "Then let's get back to it." The day unfolded in its usual blur: meetings, reports, calls. But something in me was different. Every conversation felt slower, more intentional. Grief has a way of stripping away the noise, leaving only the essential flight plan. That afternoon, during a break between meetings, I walked out to the hangar. A new jet was being prepped for delivery, its paint still gleaming. On its side, the name shimmered in the light, the Carlyle. Jenna appeared behind me, watching my expression. "The board thought it was time we named one in your honor," she said. I smiled, tracing the letters with my fingers. "He would have hated that," I said. "Then it's perfect," she replied. We both laughed quietly, the sound echoing against the metal walls. Later that evening, I sat in my office alone. The sun dipped low, setting the harbor on fire with its reflection. I opened my father's old leather portfolio, the same one he'd carried to every meeting, every deal. Inside were neatly folded papers, including one addressed to me. "Emma, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I won't pretend I was the father you needed. I taught you to fight the world, but never taught you how to love it. You built something extraordinary, and though I was too proud to say it, I've never been more in awe of anything in my life. I hope one day you'll see that my harshness wasn't meant to break you. It was the only way I knew to prepare you. You proved me wrong, and I've never been happier to be wrong about anything. Now take that lesson and apply it. Carlyles do not leave capital exposed." Tears blurred the words. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it back inside. For the first time, I felt no anger, no bitterness, just an ache that was oddly tender. Tucked beneath the letter was the small leather-bound journal he had pressed into my hand at the hospital. I opened it. It wasn't a diary. It was a crisis plan. His meticulous handwriting detailed the critical flaws in CNA's proposed Asia acquisition, a multi-billion-dollar deal that would either secure their legacy or destroy it. The note on the inside cover simply read, "Protect the line." That night I sat on my balcony, the city lights flickering below like constellations trapped on Earth. The cold air stung my cheeks, but I stayed. The grief came not as a storm, but as a quiet tide pulling then receding, leaving space for something new. Peace. The next few weeks became a strange blend of endings and beginnings. Helion was entering a new phase, expanding internationally, opening offices in Zurich and Tokyo. I delegated more, trusting the team that had grown up alongside me. One afternoon, I called a company-wide meeting. Hundreds of faces filled the screen as I spoke from the main conference room. Helion began as a dream in a rented office, I said. But dreams don't fly on their own. They need people who believe when no one else does. Every one of you made this possible. A pause. We've reached a milestone few ever do, but this isn't the summit. It's just clear air after a long climb. Applause filled the room, genuine and loud. Afterward, as people filtered out, I stayed behind with Jenna. She looked at me curiously. "So what's next for you?" I hesitated, then smiled. "I don't know. For the first time in my life, I'm okay not knowing." That weekend, I visited my mother for the first time since the funeral. She met me at the door with tired eyes and a soft smile. "I watched your interview last night," she said. "You looked happy." "I am," I said simply. We sat in the kitchen where I'd once been lectured about grades and expectations. It felt smaller now, like time had shrunk it. "I used to think your father's way was the only way," she said quietly. "Discipline, perfection, control. But watching you build Helion, you did it with compassion. That's the part he never understood." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Maybe that's how I honor him, by doing it differently." She nodded, eyes glistening. "He'd be proud of you, Emma, even if he'd never admit it." As I drove home that night, the highway stretched out like a ribbon of light. For the first time, I wasn't chasing something ahead or escaping something behind. I was just moving free, unburdened, alive. Weeks later, on the anniversary of Helion's founding, I stood before my team in our new hangar. We were unveiling our next generation of aircraft, sleek, efficient, sustainable. As the curtain dropped, applause erupted. Cameras flashed. But amid all the celebration, I caught my own reflection in the polished surface of the plane. Not the girl who once begged for approval, nor the woman who fought to prove she belonged. Someone new. Someone whole. After the ceremony, I slipped away to the observation deck overlooking the runway. The sun was setting again, just as it had on the day I opened my first office. Planes roared in the distance, slicing through the golden haze. I closed my eyes, listening to the sound. It no longer felt like escape. It felt like home. And as the sky shifted from gold to blue, I whispered to the air, perhaps to my father, perhaps to myself, we made it. Not the empire, not the wealth, not the recognition, but peace, grace, and freedom. For the first time in my life, the sky wasn't something I needed to conquer. It was something that finally belonged to me. The next Christmas arrived quietly, without grandeur or noise. Snow drifted lazily across the harbor outside my window, and the city seemed wrapped in a hush that only winter can bring. For the first time in more than a decade, I wasn't spending Christmas at the office, or buried in spreadsheets, or silently competing with ghosts. I was home. My mother was coming over for dinner. That sentence alone would have sounded impossible years ago. Yet when the doorbell rang and I opened it to see her holding a pie instead of judgment, I realized how much could change when people choose to. "This place is beautiful," she said, stepping inside. I smiled. "You mean clean," she laughed softly. "Both." We sat by the window as the sun began to set, the sky painted in streaks of pink and gold. She looked around the apartment, the awards on the wall, the photos of Helion's first hangar, the framed picture of my father on his old yacht smiling in a rare, unguarded moment. "You know," she said after a while, "he used to watch your interviews on TV. He'd never tell you, but he'd watch them all." I felt a warmth in my chest that didn't hurt anymore. "I think I knew," I said. We ate slowly, talking about simple things, recipes, travel, even the scholarship program I'd launched. There was no tension, no edge, just two women learning how to coexist as equals instead of roles. After dinner, I walked her downstairs to her car. She hugged me before she left. Not one of those polite embraces she'd given for show, but a real one tight, trembling human. When she drove away, I stood there in the cold, watching the taillights fade into the night. The snow had stopped. Everything was still. I went back upstairs, poured a glass of wine, and opened my laptop. My inbox was flooded with Christmas greetings from employees, clients, even former competitors. But one email caught my attention. The subject line read, "From Zurich." It was from James Richardson. "Emma, we've finalized our European expansion, and we'd like Helion to handle all executive travel. You've built something extraordinary, something that represents not just excellence but integrity. I still remember that morning at your terminal when your parents dropped their champagne glass. You've come a long way since then. Merry Christmas, and congratulations." I laughed quietly, remembering that morning like it was yesterday, the disbelief in my father's eyes, the faint tremor in my mother's hand. Now it felt like another lifetime. I replied simply, "Thank you, James." The ascent was worth the turbulence. When I closed the laptop, I caught my reflection in the window. For a long time, I just stared. The woman looking back wasn't chasing approval anymore. She wasn't haunted by failure or consumed by revenge. She was steady, grounded, and free. The next day, I visited the airport Helion's private hangar, my second home. It was Christmas morning, but I wanted to see the planes before anyone else arrived. The hangar was quiet, the floor polished like glass. A single jet gleamed in the center, the Carlisle. My father's name was still etched near the cockpit. I climbed aboard, walked through the cabin, and sat in one of the leather seats. The smell of jet fuel and polished wood felt like memory itself, nostalgic and alive. I closed my eyes and imagined him there beside me, the old version of him with that sharp suit and sharper tongue. For once, I didn't argue with the memory. I just listened. He wasn't telling me I'd end up broke. He wasn't mocking my dreams. He was just there, quiet. Proud, maybe. I whispered into the stillness, "We're okay now, Dad." When I stepped outside, the sun had just begun to rise. The light hit the plane, turning it gold. I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo. The caption came easily. "Every empire starts with one leap of faith." Later that week, I was invited to deliver the commencement speech at MIT's School of Business. As I stood before hundreds of graduates, I thought about how strange life was, how the girl once forbidden to chase her passion was now being asked to teach others how to find theirs. I used to believe success was about arriving somewhere I told them. But it isn't. Success is about continuing to move forward even when you're terrified. It's about believing in your vision long before anyone else can see it. And when they finally do, when the world finally looks at you and says, "You made it," you'll know the truth. You didn't make it for them. You made it for the person you refused to give up on. When the crowd rose in applause, I thought about all the people who had told me no. My father, my mother, investors, mentors, even my own fear. Each no had built a piece of my backbone. After the ceremony, a student approached me. She was shaking, clutching her diploma. "My dad doesn't believe in what I want to do," she said. "He says I'll fail." I smiled. "Then you're already halfway there." She frowned. "Halfway to what? To prove him wrong by proving yourself right." Her eyes widened and she nodded slowly, the words settling somewhere deep. That night I returned home and stood by my window again. The city pulsed below, alive with color and noise, yet I felt completely still. I thought about my life, the humiliation, the exile, the rebuilding, the triumph, the forgiveness. Every chapter had hurt, and every one had healed something too. The revenge I'd once fantasized about no longer mattered. The victory wasn't about wealth or recognition, it was about transformation. I hadn't defeated my past. I'd transcended it. And maybe that was what true power looked like. Not control, not conquest, but peace. As midnight neared, I opened the balcony doors. The wind was crisp, carrying the faint hum of airplanes passing overhead. I looked up, tracing their blinking lights across the sky. Once that sight had filled me with longing. Now it filled me with belonging. This was my world, my empire, my sky. The quiet hum of an engine echoed above, distant yet familiar. I raised my glass toward it, smiling. "Merry Christmas, Dad," I whispered. Then turning back inside, I picked up my phone, ready to record a short message for Helion's holiday video. "Hi, everyone," I began, smiling at the camera. "I just want to say thank you for believing, for building, for daring. Every single one of you is proof that dreams don't just fly, they land. Merry Christmas, Helion family. And remember, never let anyone tell you how high you're allowed to go." I hit stop, set the phone down, and looked one last time out the window. The city lights glowed like stars fallen to earth. And for the first time, I felt the unmistakable certainty of a perfect landing.